the first time in a century of Canadian womanhood, a royal commission has been established to examine the status of the Canadian woman.
I think we've gone about as far as we can go in accepting all this discrimination, in hoping that it might be changed, and nothing has come of it. And this is why our insistence of this group on a commission on the status of women.
Why a royal commission on the status of women? Don't women have a pretty good status in Canada now, Mrs. Bird?
The Royal Commission on the Status of Women was a real cornerstone for Canadian women to realize what their situation was and what they needed to do to change it.
Each woman must find her place, not be put in her place.
Women's rights.
That Indian woman has been the workhorse, the doormat, and the baby machine.
And God knows I'm not one of those fanatic feminists, but I mean, there are things that we have to recognize that are not what it should be.
When the hearings have been completed, and we have heard from the public, we will base our recommendations on the information we have received in these ways.
Basically, the question is very simple. What do women want? Are they getting what they want? And do they really want what they want? I'm Gordon Donaldson, and I don't know the answer any more than you do, but tonight we will study the question.
Welcome to the second Back Canadian Young Feminist Gathering. Notre révolution féministe, our revolution is now. It's incredibly exciting to see all of you here. There's some of us that have been learning about feminism, growing our feminism, and who have identified as feminists for a long time. And again, some of us are brand spanking new to feminism. So I just want to introduce you to our amazing giant team of volunteers that have put this weekend on for you, for us, for our movement, for all young women that are out there.
43 years after the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, young women from across the country have gathered here in Winnipeg to once again voice their concerns and demand change.
Rise.
There is a war on women going on right now. There is a war on feminism. That war is happening right here in Winnipeg. It's happening here in Canada, in Quebec. It's happening everywhere around the world. Right now, with the Conservative government, dozens of organizations closed their doors. 12 out of the 16 regional Status of Women Canada offices had to shut down. They were closed by the federal government. We see that this government will stop at nothing to shut us up.
The laws that we fought for and won are no longer guaranteed. In Canada, we're seeing things go backwards.
We will be post-feminists when we have post-patriarchy. Rise, rebels, rise. Rise, rebels, rise. Our struggle is not over. Rise. 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 Rise.
It's a great pleasure that we find ourselves here in Manitoba, and during this day we have been listening to the brief which has been prepared so carefully and thoughtfully by the Manitoba Committee. We are looking for understanding and truth.
I've got 10 women sitting here. They have had all these abuses in one way or another. When you walk in and you see a situation where furniture is broken and there are a couple of black eyes and a broken arm, which I have seen over and over again as a medical person, I think that we can safely say that this can happen and does happen.
How can we convey to your committee the seriousness of this problem?
The Royal Commission on the Status of Women was a very important moment in Canadian women's history. But those of us who were beginning to work on violence in exactly those years, some women were telling their stories and were telling them to the Royal Commission, but they were not, on the whole, taken up or understood as the condition of women. It would be years before that happened.
On what authority would you have this man taken out of his home?
So, because he is threatening bodily harm to the woman.
Yes, well, now who says this? Well, we cannot take a person into custody unless we have a good reason. The man says, why was I arrested? Why was my freedom taken? And we have to have an answer for him.
In the early days, women too misread the situation. No one had yet had enough consciousness-raising sessions to tell each other the truth about the violence they were suffering, the normalcy of violence. So you would hear about a rape or a murder only in very odd circumstances, and you did not hear about the blow, the black eye, the battering, the bruising. Every now and then you would see someone, you would see a woman in a grocery store, on the street with a black eye or bruising, and it was impolite to even ask.
And would you have that changed?
Yes, I would. I most certainly would, to protect the women. Sounds sort of revolutionary, but on the other hand, what are we here for?
It's a problem to be studied.
Yes.
I see.
Yes.
In 1973, there were no rape crisis centers, no transition houses, no women's centers anywhere. And in the course of 5 years, they kind of burst into existence. We were all inventing them across the country, and in fact, across the industrialized West. As soon as there was an escape possibility, women took it. And they took it in large numbers. We were full within the first couple of months and stayed full.
Kelly speaking. Hi, what's going on today? Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 It's not stupid. Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have any burns on today from this morning, or no? Because you're at work right now, you're safe? Okay, but you need somewhere to go from work this afternoon? Okay. How many kids do you have? You have 2 boys. Okay. Let me just put you on hold for a second. I'll see if I can get my partner here making some phone calls for you, okay? Where's she live? She's in Vancouver. She's only moved to BC 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. She's at work right now. Mm-hmm. She is a social worker.
Let her know that we have space, that we'll be willing for her to come and talk to us more about a plan.
So does that feel too close for you? So your preference would be to find a transition house a bit further out? Okay. And is he a big guy? Wow. Very big guy. Okay.
All women have found their solace, there's understanding, and there's support within a support group where people really understand what they're going through, and people are able to be free with their emotions and their fears. We all know from our experience in this field that there's no social, economic, or cultural barriers. There's no woman at any age, any level in society that can be immune to it. The same as there's no male abuser, okay, that cannot or will not be involved in it.
It still took me quite a few times to leave him because every time it happened, he turned on to this the cycle of violence. I still mention that all the time. Every time I think about it, he's like a really mean, horrible person, and then he turns into this beautiful, gorgeous, misunderstood man that just would slay dragons for me. And then I'm the dragon once in a while. I just forgot that role.
What I did was I packed a small bag, and I had to hide it. And it was by the stove, and you'd never look. You know that drawer you keep the pots and pans? He don't look in there. That's where I kept it, and that stayed there for a long time. We would have fights, and I'd try to leave him. And the next thing I knew, Children's Aid was at my door, and they were telling me they got calls saying that I was abusing my son, neglecting him, not feeding him. And they would come in and investigate and find that everything was fine. And lo and behold, before they leave, they wouldn't talk to me about the bruises on my arm they'd see, or the red patches on my face from being hit and smacked around before they got there, or, you know, I was 90 pounds at 5'8". You know, the stress of what I was going through was really taking a toll on me.
It was never enough. One time I didn't clean the house enough, so he brought a canister of gasoline in the house to show me how to clean my house. I thought he was gonna burn the house down with the kids. I got out, I called 911.
I couldn't even get to a shelter. I tried for months to get to a shelter, but why I couldn't get to a shelter? I had 4 kids. I had a teenage son. There's only one shelter that takes a teenage boy. And they were full. How do I leave now? So
When I first started, we thought of each incident of violence as a totally discrete, separate event. And we thought of, you know, how were we going to deal with these few bad guys? And we wondered, you know, was there a particular kind of man that committed violence against women? We thought about, was there a particular kind of woman that was vulnerable to violence against women? But very quickly we could see that it was all about the power relations between men and women on an individual and on a collective level.
And my ex, he was working for NATO and he had all this government clearance, and I found out later that he had used key logging or keystroking, and what that does is it records every single key that you hit or keystroke. And so he was actually able to get all my passwords for everything.
And it wasn't until it took him trying to kill me before I actually did leave. And I knew the whole time, like, people were saying to me, I had one friend say to me, do you not see how he's manipulating and controlling you? Do you not hear the things that are coming out of your mouth? Like, this isn't you. And I was like, no, I just like his point of views, and I would just bluff it up to something else.
And actually, when I did get pregnant, that's when everything got worse. It even got worse because it was I was able to give him total more attention when I was just me and him. And I do everything. I prostituted myself for him. I did everything for him. And it was just never enough.
It was all forms. It was financial, it was sexual, it was physical, it was emotional. If the restraining order, when it's up in 3 years, he'll come back.
I take a rope. I hang it over a rafter. And I say to myself, this is it. I've had enough and I won't take any more. So I'm standing there and I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna get on the chair. And I hang the rope, I put it around my neck. And then I think to myself, where's the fairness in this? Is there any fairness in this? Have I done anything wrong? Who have I failed? I became really angry at that time because I wanted more from my life. I wanted more from my life from my children. I remember my daughter saying to me, Mommy, do you love me? And I said, yes.
And she said, if you do, why didn't you leave him a long time ago? Look what he did to me. I'm in Children's Aid. I don't belong here. I didn't do anything wrong. He abducted my brother from me, and now I can't see him, and it's 8 years. Why couldn't you made a better decision? Why couldn't you have done something? Why did you let the system fail me? I hate you, Mother. I'll never forgive you. He's the one that's allowed to do whatever he's done, and he's gotten away with it.
Them sons of bitches let me walk out of that courtroom thinking about myself. What did I do? What could I have done? How come I feel like this? Why am I crying? Why am I still the victim sitting here talking to these people about what took place so long ago when I'm trying to move on with my life? How come I'm still being victimized?
I'm angry, but you know what? I have a right to be angry. And I'm helping other women now, because I don't want other women to go through what I went through.
The minister knows that the parliamentary report on battered wives was tabled in the House yesterday, and it states that 1 in 10 husbands beat their wives regularly, and these women, I don't think this is a very much of a laughing matter, Madam Speaker.
Easy. I don't beat my wife. You beat your wife, sorry.
Madam Speaker, I really don't think this is a laughing matter. I would like to say that the battered wives in these cases rarely have any refuge. They have no safe place to go with their children.
When Margaret Mitchell tried to have the violence against women taken seriously, she was laughed at.
Madam Speaker, I too am not amused by the derision which greeted the statement that 1 out of 10 women is beaten. I do not find it amusing, neither do the women of Canada.
It's less likely now that the House of Commons would laugh, but it's also less likely that anybody would get up in the House of Commons and talk about violence against women. That's the problem we have now. There is no political party who's sticking out its neck on the key issues of what to do with trafficking victims, what to do with rape victims, what to do with wife assault victims, how to deal with custody and access, what to do with the women in prostitution that protects them from violence. We have debates about all the things around it, but we have no serious platform being put forward by any of these politicians at the moment.
I don't know. Good morning, it's Ashima from Rape Relief. I am calling to find out if you have space for a woman and 2 kids.
Even like, you know, the kids'
2
birth certificates.
Yeah.
Or... Let me just put you on hold one more time and I'll see if we have a bed for you, okay?
I'm calling. Nobody has space so far. Did you get her address?
Yeah. She would be happy to just be further out.
Oh, hi, Dawn. It's Ashima from Rape Relief. How are you?
Yeah.
Good.
Well,
do you have
sure,
space for a woman and 2 kids?
You're not alone. That feeling of the tension as it just
you
starts
don't?
escalating again.
Would you later on? Should I call back? Not today? There's all the violence?
Yeah, he's strangled her several times and he throws her up against the wall and stuff, and she's saying it's every 2 to 3 days now, and it's just getting worse since they moved here because she's isolated and their families aren't here and stuff.
Okay. The children, there are 2 boys, 12 and 14. Would you accept them? Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, bye. Keep talking to her. There's no space right now.
Horror in a quiet Mississauga neighborhood. The body of a woman in her 50s is taken from a home this afternoon. Police were called to the
That is the case in Spring Hill tonight after a woman was found dead inside her home. The police say she was murdered. A male who lived with her is in
First
custody.
Nations women in BC have been targeted for years. Many remain missing.
The assault came on this stretch of road as the 31-year-old and a group of friends were heading home from a bar.
She said the young men approached them, unleashed a tirade of homophobic
911, do you need police, fire, or ambulance? Hello? Hello, can you hear me? I need to know where you are.
She was found bound in her bedroom, but it was too late. Calling the women dykes and faggots, and then the attack.
The fear of being out on the street, being vulnerable to attack, actually shapes the choices that all women make about how we're going to spend our time, how we're going to make sure that we're protected. This actually, is how violence against women works. While it targets particular women, it also works to keep all women in their place.
We understand at some very profound level that we should not think we are free to walk about the city, have the career of our choice, expect equal relationships, or dare to speak up. You don't particularly want to identify as a victim, but it's important not to be blind. It's important to recognize that your security is wrapped up in your capacity to see your own circumstances and to share that honestly with other women and do something about it.
When I came here as a resident with my kids, I was so touched by some of the women that I had met here, and I was touched by some of the workers. I was touched by the new political ideas that I had just, learned. And it's really a powerful thing for us as a collective to say your experience matter, and you can share your experience with another woman here, and that is a very powerful thing.
More than 1,000 women a year, more like 1,500 women a year, call us for help. And we've collected all those stories. We think it's a big body of evidence that the authorities never acknowledge about violence against women.
Going through the records that Rape Relief has kept of male violence against women, it's overwhelming. It is the same trends. It's wife assault, incest, verbal threats, physical assaults, and you just see them again and again and again, and you see that system. And in hearing the women's stories, you see men are using the same manipulative tricks. They're gaining women's trust, and then they're abusing that trust. We're going to end it. We're going to end violence against women, and we're not going to stop until we do.
The normalcy of violence against women is a measure of women's inequality. It's a force that mobilizes against women's equality. That's a huge social force. In the part of the world that claims to have the best advance on the status of women.
Thunder. Nina Louise, Helen Betty Osborne, Helen Giling, Beatrice Sinclair, Georgina Patman, Shannon Alexander, Maisie Ojik, Doreen Voss, Shelley Joseph, Tashina General, Amber Redmond, Tiffany Morrison, and my grandmother, Gladys Tolley. Kichimigwach, thank you very much.
For some reason, we feel sometimes that we're in fear to speak out, but we shouldn't. That's part of who we are, to be able to voice what needs to be said. As you get rid of the women in our communities, you're getting rid of nations. You're getting rid of the next generations. And that's what happened to my cousin. My cousin Tashina was missing, and her body was found 4 months later in a dug grave in my own community.
I think it was 2 weeks after we had buried my cousin, and I had to meet with the Minister of Justice. And I can remember I was really angry. I was angry. Because many of the women were not just victims of, domestic violence or relationship violence. many of them are targeted by white men. So, and so we're victims, survivors within our own communities, and survivors within the mainstream. And so that's, you know, that's a lot. That's a lot to have to survive, and to also know that it's not safe in anywhere for Indigenous women.
Today's very hard. Today will be the last time I ever get to touch my child's remains, because it's a sacred ceremony. I have to let go of that anger and that pain that he held me for 9 years. My family has to let go, so I am taking these steps. So please, this is what you're seeing. This is reality.
We've had hundreds of Aboriginal women go missing from the streets in Canadian cities. It's a crisis situation for Aboriginal women. So to think that that kind of violence doesn't happen in Canada is just an erasure of Aboriginal women's presence in this country. The levels of violence that continue to exist for all kinds of reasons against Aboriginal women, but all reasons which can be traced back to colonial domination, right? The levels of violence are as high as any war zone that you might want to kind of think about.
Mr. Speaker, Sisters in Spirit have uncovered 520 cases of missing or murdered Aboriginal women and girls in Canada. The United Nations has chastised Canada for its shameful lack of response. Their plight has been ignored long enough.
You can't argue against the statistic and the numbers of women who have gone missing or murdered. It's a fact. You can't argue that. I think it's very political. If they keep us unhealthy, if they keep us as victims, then we don't have a voice.
You know, I come here speaking from my heart because 2 generations ago, my grandmother, being a Mohawk woman, was beaten, sexually beaten and physically beaten for being a Mohawk woman. I too am here to represent the Native Women's Association of Canada, and the women that we represent have a statement. And it's about the respect of Aboriginal women in this country.
Any abuser can apologize. They can say, "I'm sorry," as they're kicking you. It's the actions that make the difference.
So what is it that this government is going to do in the future to help our people? Because we're dealing with major human rights violations, and women have taken the brunt of it all.
You know, we can talk about land, we can talk about treaty rights, we can talk about Aboriginal rights, but if you don't get to those social issues of racialized and sexualized violence, you know, if we can't get to and address those core issues, what's the point?
Around the world, the Indigenous women are the ones who are being attacked by every man above them in the hierarchy. That's why their stats are so high. Race and class and gender conflate to be one horrible weapon against Aboriginal women. We know that every act of violence that's tolerated, endured, observed, creates more. What we really have to do is interfere with every single act of violence against women, be in a constant uprising.
There's no simple solution like us staying home or locking up the 5 crazies. It doesn't work. All men are going to have to change, and all women are going to have to demand that they do. And until we get that kind of change, which includes massive, massive social change, we aren't going to be free.
There was an uprising, and that uprising was achieved in my generation. And it resulted in responses like the creation of institutions, like the beginnings of ministers responsible for the status of women, like the women's centers and rape crisis centers and transition houses. So we'll see another wave of uprising, and perhaps it's already begun.
There has not been any decrease in violence against women in the last 15 years in this country. This is unacceptable.
Just go around and in that way try to synthesize some of our demands into a different or hopefully more narrow list.
We're also talking about victim blaming. We're talking about police responses.
Challenging the existing culture of violence through education.
Like funding space, access, specialized programs.
Not having to give more money for shelters because we want to prevent the violence instead of having it happen.
Our freedom and safety as women and as Native women indigenous to this land is possible, and we won't be told otherwise or settle for anything less. We demand safe, not safer. We demand harm elimination, not harm reduction.
You need to get ready, you need to get angry, you need to get focused.
Be heard, be that voice. Don't be scared no more.
C'est nécessaire que notre lutte, elle soit politique, que notre lutte, elle s'investisse dans les partis politiques et dans toutes les instances démocratiques que nous avons.
We have power when we unite, when we act collectively. Enough being nice.
Well, goodness, you've now been in the 4 capitals of all the Atlantic provinces with your friends, the Royal Commissioners on the Status of Women, Ed. Can you summarize how that session went?
Well, they heard 23 briefs, not all that many considering there were 4 provinces, and we heard very little about abortion and birth control.
Does this suggest then that the Maritimes are more conservative?
I know that the one brief that dealt with abortion was strongly against legalizing it.
This publicity has taken the form, really, of an active promotion of the point of view of those who favor abortion.
Is it a gross injustice to a woman to insist that she bear a child which results from violence such as rape?
I don't see how we could permit her to have that choice, to choose whether or not someone should live or die.
We live in a province that's kind of stuck in time.
There's all these restrictions. Yes, you have the right to your own body, but we'll tell you how and who and when.
I think it's important, my body, my choice. I get to choose what I do with my body. And I think if we lose that right, we lose a lot of rights in a lot of things.
There's so many ways in which the right-wing agenda and the religious dogma that's the driver behind it all are shaping the future of young women in this country.
They're Canadian women. They're no different than Canadian women across the country, yet they have to pay from their own pocket for something that other women don't.
By the time they're actually here for the procedure, they're kind of broken, just because of what it's taken for them to even get to Fredericton.
Come on in here. Hi. Just follow me this way.
I think in New Brunswick, I think women's lives have always been at risk when it comes to abortion.
you have a long drive?
Yeah, it's pretty long.
Good morning. Come on in. How you doing?
Taller Clinic, can I
Good.
help
What's
you?
your name?
All right, what's your first
I'll
name?
give you your number, and then you'll be in for your ultrasound.
Okay.
Okay, so it
Perfect.
shouldn't be too long.
Okay. Now, you don't have any insurance coverage, do you, with anybody? Okay. Would you want to claim this on your income tax?
Sure.
I mean, you're paying for something you shouldn't have to pay for. It's a legitimate medical expense.
Okay.
So I would just have to write on what it's for in the doctor's name, because
The situation in New Brunswick is different than anywhere else in Canada.
So that's all I need.
In order for a woman to have an abortion, which is paid for by Medicare, she has to be referred by 2 doctors. It has to be done in a hospital, and that it has to be done by a gynecologist. There are many, many women in New Brunswick that do not have a family doctor or that have family doctors that are anti-choice. So immediately they are restricted from having a Medicare paid for abortion in one of the 2 hospitals. Technically, the province is violating the Canada Health Act that says women ought to have equal access to abortion. This is the only other option for women in New Brunswick, and they have to pay.
It was a pretty big shocker. We've had our kids, we're married, we've been together forever, and it just wasn't what we expected. With my family doctor, he's great, but I don't have that relationship with him where I feel comfortable talking about my body or my sexual health. I also know friends that have gone through the hospital system, and the labeling that you get and the hoops that you have to go through. I preferred to come here where it wasn't something to be ashamed of, and that I knew that I would be in a safe, secure place and be able to feel comfortable with my decision.
All these barriers are harder on younger women, poorer women, and women who are more marginalized and without resources, because $600 for some women is no problem, but for others it's an impossibility.
I wasn't in a position to have a child. I couldn't even afford the pregnancy test. So I had actually gone to Moncton to go to the hospital, and then there would have been no cost. It would have been covered. And it was really scary. I thought I knew what I wanted to do, but then I think a lot of the time the people that I was dealing with in the hospital would put some doubt in me, and it was this big, like, what if you make a mistake, or what if it's harder to deal with getting an abortion than not getting an abortion. The relationship I was in was abusive on both sides, and there was a lot of drug use and issues with alcohol. So basically I knew that, I couldn't even take care of myself at that point. I really couldn't take care of myself, and how was I supposed to take care of a child, I remember her asking me if I had permission, or if he had my partner consented to this. And I remember thinking, I'm in Moncton, he's not here. When I got the test, he wasn't there. Like, what do I need his consent for, Like, I'm here, that's my body, I'm giving you my consent. I remember being with the technician, and they had to do an ultrasound. I remember her asking me, well, do you want to see the baby? And she just sort of tilted the screen, and I just remember thinking, like, of course it tugs on my emotions a little bit, but my decision had been made. I knew I was making the right decision. It sort of seemed like that my decision wasn't respected. Maybe there was a little bit of room for me to change my mind.
What have we got? Life. What do we want? Life. What's a baby need? Life. What do we want for every child? Life. Amen. This year we have something really wonderful to celebrate, and that is that the number of abortions in our hospitals of New Brunswick
there's a connection of people who are not supportive of abortion rights, and those are the same people who tend to have the loudest voices in the community.
No matter what other arguments we put forward, the root cause is selfishness and sin.
Now there's a whole new force that we're up against in the form of religious fundamentalism and the religious right. Along with the anti-abortion side of it, there's also an anti-birth control, abstinence-only sort of mindset. So instead of equipping young people to make healthy decisions around their bodies, they're just shutting it down, shutting down all discussion, all access to resources, all information.
Our local committee has been very active in putting pressure on hospital officials when we tell them to close this abortion clinic.
I absolutely think that the barriers for access to abortion put women's lives at risk. Every extra step a woman has to take, it becomes that more inviting for her to just do it herself, or to seek out somebody closer and cheaper who might not necessarily be licensed.
Women have always been dying, trying to get abortions, and I think women still are. We all need to be very, very cautious. Rights that have been hard won could be easily diminished, if not lost.
Vancouver Women's Caucus is leaving today on this abortion cavalcade and is joining with women all across Canada in a nationwide struggle to remove abortion from the criminal code and to make free abortions available to every woman on demand.
Women fighting together, working together is the only way that we're going to be able to change this law.
The abortion cavalcade left Vancouver with 5 cars filled with women who wanted to talk to other women and wanted to build a momentum across Canada. So we'd have women come forward telling us horrendous stories about their backroom abortions, and young women were being forced to have children they didn't want because of rapes, incest, the fact that they'd been sterilized without their knowing it or against their will.
We demand that women have the right to control their own bodies.
Women had no place to go that was legal and safe.
We will go ahead from here and we will speak for the women of Canada, and we will do further actions until each woman has her right to control her own life.
It was tremendously empowering for women across the country to see that they could organize. If they really got out and confronted politicians at all levels of government, that they could change things.
The women of Canada answer with fire, the blood of their sisters.
It was a wonderful, wonderful feeling. Times were changing because we were taking our lives in our own hands and speaking out.
Sisters murdered by abortion laws, keep your eyes on that prize, hold on.
Get the abortion law changed and we can look after the rest. Taking abortion out of the criminal code is a high priority.
The women of this country are moving forward and are going to win our equality and win our rights, and no one is going to stop us.
We believe that this is a fight between good and evil.
We are not going to put up with this harassment.
From 1968, I have performed 5,000 abortions in my clinic in Montreal in defiance of the abortion law, which I consider to be unjust, unfair, restrictive.
There was a big movement around Dr. Morgentaler His clinic was raided a few times. He was arrested. He went to jail.
We're going to stay here as long as we can to try and reduce the number of abortions, to try and put Dr. Morgenthaler out of business.
You must get in the street, you must stay in the street, and if they tell you you're not ready, you just say, ready or not, here we come. Thank you very much.
Morgenthaler was threatened on many occasions. The clinics were attacked, the women defending the clinics were attacked, both at the clinics and in their homes. Doctors have been shot at and doctors have been killed.
I don't think it was just Dr. Morgenthaler that moved everything forward in Canada. It was grassroots women's groups.
Good evening. A historic decision on abortion today, a judgment that will have a profound impact all across the country.
Outside Dr. Morgenthaler's clinic in Toronto, his supporters were overjoyed at news of the Supreme Court's decision.
It's been a long struggle, and we knew we could win, and we've won it, and we're going to keep this victory forever for the women of Canada.
The women's movement changed those laws. In the US with Roe v. Wade and in Canada with the Morgenthaler decision. That was a work of feminism, like a measurable thing that feminism did. It was a mistake to think that once the Morgenthaler decision happened that this fight was over, because it's not going to be won that easily.
There is a cloud of unholy silence that hangs over this abortuary like a dark cloud. The cry of innocence betrayed.
Once the clinic was built, the anti-choice people bought a house directly next door to the clinic that was already there. So that's the base of their operations in Fredericton.
To live our faith.
Most pro-lifers are in this because we believe that that's a child, that's a human being. Since my eyes were opened to this issue 5 years ago, I see everything differently now. I see everything differently, and I just see men being so irresponsible. Part of that is that feminists have said, we don't need you anymore. We don't want you to be men. We don't want you to hold us up as women. It's not choice for women, it's no choice.
I never want to underestimate what can happen here, because we live in little sleepy old Fredericton, that something horrible couldn't happen. I don't think it would be from our neighbors next door, from the right to life people. I think they incite violence in other people, and I think that's what happens when doctors get hurt.
There are still threats of violence against clinics. There are still threats of violence against physicians. I'm actually very proud of what I do, but for my own safety, I just have to be cautious, because unfortunately some people out there, just because of what I do, would want to harm me.
You know, our own doctor got kicked out of her practice, and no other doctors would come to her defense. And there's a lot of doctors here, strong women doctors, that are pro-choice. But they're strong women doctors and pro-choice among themselves and not publicly, because publicly it's going to affect them. You know, they're always going to be out there. It's always the same people. And it often astounds me that so few people can have such a profound impact.
We saw them when we were driving in, and they have these big obnoxious signs, and the first thing I think that I noticed was that there were more men out that day than there were women, which really struck me funny. As soon as I got out of the car, I saw two of them. They just start yelling at you, and half the things you can hear and half of the things just sound like noise in the background. But this one woman was just leaning against the railing, she looked at me and said, "You're killing your baby. Why are you killing your baby?" Even though I was sure, and even though I knew that it was my choice, and even though I knew that I was doing it for the right reasons for me, she thought that, you know, she had the right, for whatever reason, to tell me I was a murderer. And that was brutal. It really was.
Women come here and they want to tell me why they're having an abortion. And I say, look, you don't have to tell me why. And there's women who come and see me and they cry and they start sobbing and they say, I just don't want to have children.
It just feels I feel guilty a little bit, you know what I mean?
All right, but you guys have talked about it together.
Oh, yes.
I said, you know what? It's okay. We're not all made to be mothers, right? It's okay. And she just sobbed. Just sobbed, crying. I mean, she was crying in my office for half an hour. I couldn't stop her. It was for the first time, she had permission to feel okay about a decision that she was making. That we gave her permission to feel okay about a decision. What have we done to women? I don't really know. It scares me. We've done bad things to women, I think. The fact that New Brunswick has been kind of allowed to get away with restricting abortion rights for women is almost setting a bit of a precedent in a backwards direction for the rest of Canada.
Mr. Hoback.
Ms. Hepner.
Ms. Hepner.
Mr. Lobb.
Mr. Lobb.
Mr. McColeman.
Mr. McColeman.
Mr. Payne.
Mr. Payne.
Mr. Upal.
Mr. Upal.
Mr. Richards.
Mr. Richards.
Mr. Weston St. John.
Mr. Weston St. John.
Mr. Woodworth.
Mr. Woodworth.
Mr. Young.
Mr. Young.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Preston.
Mr. Preston.
Mrs. Smith.
Mrs. Smith.
Mr. Trost.
Mr. Trost.
It's a big shock to a lot of people that this is still an issue.
Mr. Albrecht.
A lot of women are actually finding their way to the movement, and specifically to the abortion rights movement, through having gone through an absolutely awful experience of trying to get an abortion. It's a very uncharacteristically fresh thing to be happening in Canadian feminism.
Right wing! Right wing!
We're in this because we believe in beautiful feminist values like solidarity, equality, freedom, justice, peace. Il n'y avait plus cette espèce de mouvement, de réseau pan-canadien qui nous permettait de réfléchir ensemble, de partager sur qu'est-ce qui se passe au plan local, les attaques qu'on essuie, les reculs qu'on essuie. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? On s'organise, on en crée un autre, puis on va emmener des luttes, puis on va gagner! We have to think long-term, women. Our abortion right is under attack. Our right to choose what to do with our body is under attack. This is unacceptable.
There's no way to solve the abortion problem without changing entirely how we look at women as a society, because abortion is not going away. Unwanted pregnancies are not going away. What needs to go away is a certain attitude about women. That's where that fight needs to be fought.
Like, as soon as I decided, like when I told my friends
I decided to have an abortion, they were like, oh, you should talk to my friend so-and-so. Oh, it was like the biggest secret club opened up to me, and all of a sudden everyone I know knows someone or is someone who's had an abortion. It was like, why are we silent?
I had to coerce him into giving me the birth control by saying that I was using it so that I wouldn't get cramps anymore. And then it was okay.
People trying to control at what time you should have a baby instead of like just seeing it as a choice, general choice of a woman's over her body.
Until we can control our own bodies, there's no other place in the world that we can be equal if we can't even have that say over our own bodies. What are some things that you want the movement to be for you? Because we're here like talking as young women about a movement that we're running for ourselves. So that's why I wanted this workshop to be reproductive justice focused, so not just pro-choice.
We kind of do need to move past the whole anti-choice, pro-choice, because it's restricting us to constantly be on the defense. It limits us in the end.
Pro-choice has a very specific connotation of second wave women fighting for abortion access and legality. There's a big difference between changing the law and changing the way we view women's bodies and the way that society works. For a lot of people, the important and pressing concern is not where can I get an abortion covered by Medicare. It's how am I going to feed my kids? It's how am I going to get out of this abusive relationship? How am I going to stop the government forcibly sterilizing my community? So, you know, when I say choice, it means a certain thing to me that it might not necessarily mean to someone who has a lot less privilege. So reproductive justice is a more holistic way of looking at sexual choice and about controlling our bodies.
Reproduction cannot be separated from the socioeconomic status of women. What about the women who would choose to have children and who would choose to keep them? They also have to be taken into account. Many resort to abortion because they can't actually do that. We as a society do not actually provide adequate services and support to women. So abortion becomes a huge woman's issue, right? Because she's the one who will be made responsible for bearing the child, for having the child, and for raising the child in a society where she herself is fundamentally unequal. It's only when everything else has been exhausted that abortion becomes an option for women. It really is a place of no choice.
We find more and more that the status of the woman is very much affected by what happens to her in the process of having children. Therefore, we think that it's very much her right to have some say and some control over this process.
And I think we've got to change our thinking. We mustn't look down on the woman who needs daycare services to leave her children there when she goes to work. I think we've got to accept the fact that in our technological society, the two-pay envelope has become practically a necessity.
48% of the labor force now are women. But I mean, what happens to all those children while the mothers are working? Do they all get other women in to look after the children? I'm sure they don't.
Well, doesn't this mean that the problem of daycare is really one that has to be looked at very closely, right away? We're really behind, aren't we, Ed?
It's 40 years since the Status of Women Commission. Here we are today in 2011, and we're still fighting for exactly the same thing. It's the lived daily experience of women, primarily responsible for childcare and for child rearing, that still makes it a women's equality issue. A national childcare system is a missing social program from our country.
Good morning.
Hi, Beth. Sharon Gregson calling about your child on our waiting list for toddler care. I know that you've had your daughter on our waiting list for quite some time now, I'm sad to say over 2 years. So we are getting closer to having a space available for her, and I'm just wanting to call and check to make sure that you are still interested. And just to, of course, confirm the fees are now almost $1,200 a month. They're $11.95 a month, just to make sure you're aware of that. Like many advocates, I got involved with childcare as a young mother. I had been on social assistance, I was on welfare. I'd been in university, got pregnant, and had 2 children very quickly, and decided to go back to school when they were very little. I knew there was childcare on campus, so I showed up at the daycare center expecting that, of course, I would have a space. Not only did I not have a space and I was on a long waiting list, but even if I had been able to get a space, I wouldn't have been able to afford it. So it was a really a rude awakening. And I see exactly the same things happening today. Until people need childcare, they have no idea what a crisis the whole situation is.
In this area, there are not a lot of spaces available. So as soon as I found out I'm pregnant, I put them on the waiting list. So before they were born, they were already on the waiting list. And in my case, because I need 2 spaces at a time, so I need to do that early. At the beginning, when we first started, they were actually only doing part-time and then part-time at my parents'. Just I couldn't afford it.
I need to find what's that.
But as my boys get older, my parents start aging, it's almost not possible anymore to put the 2 boys at their house under their care. So I have no choice but to put them in full-time. And then now when it's like 90% of my salary go into daycare.
This is your cup.
It's also a question for Vina about how she wants to make a personal decision about, continuing her career as well. A lot of the childcare burden falls to the woman, and already they earn a lower wage, and having such high childcare costs just eat away all their earning ability.
Well, in my work now, I actually do meet a lot of parents. Some of them do have similar situation like me, and they ended up quitting their job and just being a stay-home mom. Other moms try to find other solutions so they can continue with their work. They try and have somebody else from overseas to come over.
I realized very quickly that the cost was actually going to be less to hire a full-time live-in nanny than it would be to put 2 kids in daycare. The option for me would have been, either I stay in my career and go into debt every month in trying to pay for my childcare, or I end up at home with 2 kids, renting a small apartment, living on welfare. And that's not a route that I was ever willing to go. But every month that I had to have that live-in nanny, every month I went into debt, every single month. And at the end of it, I'm about $20,000 in debt. And that's huge to take on, as a single parent with 2 kids. That's a huge debt load to take on. And the sole reason for that is childcare.
Today, in towns and villages all over North America, men are leaving home. And to the women left behind falls the task of manning the internal defenses on the home front.
When married women with small children have to take jobs, everything possible will be done to provide day care for the children.
During World War II, childcare was for women to work in essential wartime industries, but nobody really thought about feminism or women's equality at that time.
Are you going to keep on working?
I should say not. When my husband comes back, I'm going to be busy at home.
Good for you.
Well, this job belongs to some soldier. When he comes back, he can have it.
Oh, that's swell.
Fast forward to the 60s and the beginning of, kind of second stage feminism.
I will not stay in the home just because a man says that I should.
We have to keep society going, and thank God it's the women that have to do it.
And since it's the mother who's in the home with the children most of the time, it's the mother who has to press the feminist cause.
Child care services have been pleaded for again and again by women as individuals and within organizations. Our small group from suburbia joins the Greek chorus. Is anyone listening?
I think the Royal Commission on the Status of Women is a real marker in the whole history of childcare in Canada. It was the first time that it was really put on the map as a women's issue, as a central part of an agenda for women's equality. If you look at the report, it's a roundup of all the women's issues. You know, it's very comprehensive, and it was in, childcare was in there as a women's issue. They did make 167 recommendations, and all of them were addressed, partially at least, except for childcare. In childcare, any action that there has been has fallen back.
People say we must have more daycare centers than we have now. This comes up again and again and again.
The idea of a national childcare program was always put forward as the key demand by all the childcare advocates.
This government has no commitment to quality childcare.
There's not enough daycare, and what does exist is not good enough for the children who are in it.
The first federal task force on childcare was a Trudeau initiative, and it actually carried over into the Mulroney period.
For many women, childcare is the key that will open the door to future equality.
And we never have made any headway.
Training courses.
We'll keep advocating until we get a comprehensive, high-quality...
Government people were very tired of it. They felt that it was very expensive and they couldn't do it right.
The domestic workers program is an important part of the child care system in this country.
The live-in caregiver program is just a way to fill the hole in the absence of child care. All the successive generations of governments, you have to re-educate them all the time.
We're making more of an attempt to put child care back on the federal and political agenda.
And I'm telling you that everything that is written there, I intend to implement.
Quebec has launched a new daycare project, a project with big plans.
Quebec, by that time, had its own childcare program. And when Paul Martin was elected, we almost had something in place nationally for the first time.
The time has come for a truly national system of early learning and childcare. The government will put the foundations in place with its provincial and territorial partners, charting a national course that focuses on results.
But things started unraveling.
This House has lost confidence in the government. All those in favor of the motion will please rise.
So the Harper government got elected on January 23rd, 2006. And the first thing they did, they walked out of the swearing in and they walked to a microphone and said, we're going to cancel the program. Essentially, that national program was over, and it caused a real hiatus in any kind of forward direction. When you think about it, it's decades later, generations later, and my daughter and her friends are in the same situation with childcare that I and my friends were in the early 1970s.
Basically, you're set loose on your own. You know, as a working mother, I've really struggled with trying to be a mother, but trying to have a career and trying to find an affordable childcare solution. It's very, very difficult to try to balance those things and try to be there when you need to be there for your kids, but at the same time, have your own career. I think every female who works and has children struggles with it.
That's why we're providing choice in child care, $100 a month in universal child care benefit, because, Mr. Speaker, we know that parents know that our Conservative government is the only one that's going to stand up for choice for them.
The universal child care benefit was brought in by the Harper government as a replacement for the canceled national child care program, the agreements. And what it does is it gives families for every child 6 and under $100 a month taxable. The concept is that it delivers choice in child care, that it will give women a choice to stay at home with their children or a choice to use whatever kind of child care they want.
We are the party who has offered choice to parents in terms of child care.
This government is delivering choice in child care.
We believe in choice for Canadians.
Give them choice with child care.
Parents can choose their choice and with choice in how they got their child care.
That's what this government is doing, and we're proud of the progress we're making.
We pay $1,500, we get a $100 check. What is that going to cover? It maybe if some groceries for the month. I mean, so it doesn't even come close to what is needed.
We don't give people $100 and tell them to put it towards their heart operation if they've got heart trouble. Or if they want to go to the library, we don't give them $20 and say, build your own library. Childcare is one of those things that needs to be provided for communally.
As a social policy, I can't think of a poorer way to actually use public money that you call childcare.
A new study puts Canada last when it comes to the quality of early childcare. The International Report Card by UNICEF ranked the world's 25 richest countries on the number of benchmarks. Canada and Ireland tied for last place, each country meeting only one of the benchmarks.
I do worry about what it means that we haven't invested in childcare. I think it's significant of something else. Yes, missing political will and worry about the size of investment, but there's also a lot of coming to terms with the fact that women are in the workforce and that mothers are going to work.
Successive governments have really resisted a national childcare system, and the way in which they have dealt with the issue of childcare is to provide it in privatized kinds of ways. And so we have the live-in caregiver program of domestic workers, where middle class and upper class Canadian families can actually bring in domestic workers to provide childcare within the home.
They said it's a big opportunity. It's a good country. It's the best. I only knew is like I going to Canada. After 2 years, I can sponsor my family. That's it.
So the Living Caregiver Program is the latest of a long line of pseudo childcare institutions in Canada. If you look at the program, the way it's been advertised, or at least the way that it's being marketed abroad, that you only work for 2 years for a family and then that's it, you get your Canadian citizenship. It's not that simple, actually.
They said, you come to Canada, you're gonna work at 8 hours only. So after 8 hours, you're gonna pay for overtime, right? But unfortunately, no. I work like from 7:30 until the kids sleep. So it's like 14 hours, right? It's live-in, right? So they can go to the vacation. They left the 2 kids with me for 10 days. The 10 days that I work for 24 hours, the extra is only 100, imagine. You know, if you're new, you're always scared. You're always scared to tell them, why you don't pay me? I want to quit with you. They feel that we don't know. But honestly, we know. Because of my paper, always. Because of my paper. That's why I didn't complain.
So we see a kind of global exploitation of women's labor that gets organized through Canadian state policies. What it allows middle class and upper class women to do is to become professionals, to advance their own careers, and offload their responsibilities onto women who are more vulnerable and kind of placed lower on the global hierarchy than themselves. And, they become complicit in the exploitation of domestic workers. Now, not all employers might exploit the women, but structurally, the relationship allows them to do that. It's not about the individual goodness of the woman who's employing, or it's not about the individual kind of gratitude of the domestic workers. Many of them are grateful because they come from terrible situations of poverty and violence, right? And this is one way in which they can support their own children back home, but at what cost?
Kamusta ang school mo?
Ha?
Kamusta yung school mo?
Okay lang.
Namimiss ko na kayo.
Ako rin naman eh.
I came here November 2007. After my 24 month, I passed the permanent resident application. Now I'm almost 4 years, but my family is not still here.
Malapit na. Malapit na.
Childcare is socially necessary labor. And so we have to provide for it in a way that is socially responsible and socially accountable.
Gagala kami.
I left him only when he was 3 years old. Yeah, he's like a baby. Yeah, it's hard for me, I can count on my hands the days that we spent together.
Love you. Yeah, namimiss ko na kayo. Bye-bye.
It's absolutely a criminal exploitation and a really, really cynical way of providing childcare for Canadians, advantaged Canadians who can afford it.
Without a national child care program, this is the replacement child care, but it doesn't really address the issues of all women. Anything that has been seen as women's work and responsibility is just undervalued, which is probably why you could get away with exploiting women to do child care, or why anything that has to do with child care is not valued. Childcare isn't just about women's work, and if it is women's work, it shouldn't be on the backs of third world women.
Matthew, kausap ko pa si Papa at si Kuya. Ano, gusto mo kausap si Papa, si Kuya? Ano, namimiss niyo si Matthew?
Namimiss si Matthew.
They said I'm not eligible to enroll him in subsidized daycare because I'm not a permanent resident.
The Living Caregiver Program is a de facto child care program, but only for a certain class of women. And unfortunately, the women that are providing this kind of child care are the ones who can't also afford child care for their own children.
For now, I don't have any choice, so it's a private daycare. It's so expensive. Being a single mom right now is like very hard.
Universal childcare would mean that, all women would have access, including immigrant women. It would actually, create a level playing field for women to participate in the labor market.
When childcare exists and it truly is affordable, and it truly is accessible, and it truly is available to women, what possibilities that opens up for young women's lives.
There's a report in Toronto that the major recommendations of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women include abortions on demand and more daycare centres. The long-awaited report will be tabled Monday in the House of Commons.
It's clear that the fight for reproductive rights and the fight for a collective response to the needs of children is absolutely key to escaping male violence, but it's also key to creating the liberty that will prevent the violence.
It's like you can see I'm finally happy.
We may be able not only to give women equal opportunity in every aspect of life, but maybe help to create a society in which people will be judged on merit, not by the color of their skin or their religion or their sex.
A lot of people think that feminism is dead because it's unnecessary, because we've achieved equality. The oppression of women is so systemic and so ubiquitous that it's just everywhere in our lives, so we don't think of it as oppression anymore. There are a lot of stories that need to be heard that aren't being heard right now. If they were being heard, then people would be a lot more aware of how much we need feminism.
I was actually asked, are you a feminist? And I say, no, I'm a woman. I'm an Indigenous, I'm a Mohawk woman. And these are my roles and my responsibilities. It's called a revolution. You know, when the people start saying that's enough, that's where we're headed.
That's what we discovered when we built the women's movement in the early 60s. We saw we could make change, and we did it, and we need to do it again.
I don't think we have to accept that society can't improve, that equality is inachievable. We organize because we have to organize, because it's the only way to protect our daughters, protect our mothers, protect our sisters and ourselves.
I saw an opportunity to be a part of that, working to change women's life, and I went for it, and I'm still learning.
We are actually unapologetic about our political orientations. We are feminists, we are anti-capitalist, we are anti-colonialist, and we're anti-patriarchy.
Think of within your groups and making a statement. That's what a resistance action is. One demand, one alternative.
While our final objectives are not going to represent everyone's voice is going to be heard in that process.
Whether it be by poverty, whether it be because we're escaping violence, because we're looking for job opportunities.
All this diversity of young feminists feel like they belong in that movement and they want to contribute in organizing the struggles to come.
Instead of patching the dams all over the place, like let's increase funding, let's do this. We need to reroute the waters.
We're growing as a community and as a movement. We're beginning to be who we are meant to be.
Each woman is entitled to rights, freedoms, safety. We need to ensure that our commitment to that standard does not see any sister fall below it.
It's important that we mobilize, and that if it's back to grassroots grunt work, then that's what we do. Feminism is looking different now. Very different from when I was younger, but I think it's looking good.